Empire. The fight game is in need of analytics.
Like any better that would replace that bet on Leon in play just for that one opportunity to take advantage of that puncher's chance would have made a fair bit of change. So we really are telling the story of the fight through numbers.
That's Tim Malik, CEO of Combat IQ, who is bringing analytics and statistics to the octagon. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The eye test remains the preferred viewpoint of breaking down big-time fights, but Tim Malik, who's spent time scouting football players professionally, believes that the time has come to bring analytics in, especially if markets are too mature around boxing and UFC. Our guest this week is Tim Malik. He's the CEO of Combat IQ, which is revolutionizing the world of combat sports with cutting-edge data analytics solutions. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me.
All right, tell me a little bit about your company. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so Combat IQ is actually a computer vision company dedicated to combat sports. What we do is we extract real-time fight data from broadcast streams, and we give it to the fight league so they can engage and enhance their broadcast. At the same way like you see in the NFL, MLB, NBA, which is largely non-existent in combat sports. At the same time, the data we extract, we analyze and deliver to betting companies in the form of odds for real-time in-play betting.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about what is some of the data that is of interest to sportsbooks? What is some of the data that's interest to the media companies that are broadcasting the fights?
Absolutely. So as far as sportsbooks, really there's two types. There's those that get odds from a compiler, or those that use data to actually create odds in-house. So for the former, we would just send odds as a raw file, and for the latter, typically it'd be an analysis or data set which they can then use. As far as broadcasters, providing things like the live stats has been something not existing in combat. In NFL and CFL and all these pro leagues in the U.S. and North America, we see that those real-time stats always on the screen. How many yards does this guy have? How many passing yards? Yards after catch, all that stuff. In where we're specifically starting, outside of the UFC, it's going to be hard fought to find real stats. PFL is one that has it, but really it's been non-existent for most leagues.
Okay, what kind of stats are we talking about that are important to the broadcasters?
When we talk about fights, it's like basic stats: the number of strikes, the accuracy of strikes, how many times somebody took somebody to the ground, how long they spent on the ground.
Yeah.
One of the cool things we do is extract the punch and the kick speed. Again, everything is in sub 1 second latency, so it's very much real time.
Okay. And can you tell effectiveness in any way? Is there any way to do a metric where you could almost in real time show how effective a strike is?
Absolutely. I would say that's something quite subjective.
Yeah.
Because to say if it's efficient or not, I mean, we can paint a picture for sure. And if that is what broadcasters are looking for to engage their audience, it's something we can definitely do. Absolutely. And then, a lot of what we do is bespoke solutions.
Okay. And then, I guess you're trying to look at speed of the strike, try to gauge power of the strike. Is that correct as well?
Absolutely. Whenever UFC had their fights, so the heavyweight champion, former heavyweight champion, there's named Francis Ngannou. And every time they would sell his fights, they would say Francis Ngannou punches as fast as a minivan moving full speed. They're able to quantify his punch power and draw a real life comparison. Now that's something similar we can do and scale across pretty much any athlete right from video streams.
And what are the broadcasters asking for from you? Like when they go to you with this is our wish list, we would like to know these items. What are they asking for?
Yeah, it's really two-pronged. So the first is the actual data extract. So, they don't have any statistics most of the time. The first thing we do is create that availability. I'm sure you're familiar with Pro Football Focus, some of these other companies that have catered to major sports that have built a culture around stats and data.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in 2008, 2009, everybody always talked about this is like these random stats the NFL would put out. This is this running back's third first down in the third quarter when the wind is blowing west, for example. Just random things like that. This is something, a culture that was created, and it's something that MMA is hungry for that they don't have. Fans are always asking for different types of data. So we enable that. And then the second part of that is actually visualizing it. So what we would call a body hit chart, where has a person been targeted throughout the course of the fight, overlaying those stats over the bottom 1/3 of the screen and having any sort of augmented reality stuff happening on screen. These are areas that we help with.
So are you looking to try to build a PFF model for combat sports as well, where there's going to be a database of this type of information that could potentially be disseminated to fans?
Yeah, so it's something we thought about. The way we work is we actually provide the data we extract to the league itself, so they can build that community in-house and really drive that brand loyalty. We explored having PFF for combat sports, and it's something we're going to continue to consider, but right now we're very much B2B.
Okay. And in terms of the database of information, football obviously has 22 people on a field. The conditions of every game are different. An octagon's an octagon, no matter where you put it, right? There's only 2 competitors taking place at any one point in time. I imagine the data sets are, much easier to collect, but I wonder from your point of view, how intricate could it possibly be?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. I think that you're absolutely right in the sense that it's a one-on-one sport. So there may not be as many data points, but I believe the data points are much more granular. You could talk about specific stats in the NFL, like how quick is this D tackle's first step? That's an interesting stat, like how explosive is it? The similar sort of stuff exists within combat. How does somebody transition on the ground? What submission attempt are they pulling? What's a common type of submission they like to pull? What's their favorite type of punch? Where do they place them? There's a lot of things we can really get into.
Okay, let me talk about appetite from the fans. That they want this. Again, and this is a perceptual thing with football. Yeah. Because of fantasy football, because of gambling, I do think that there is a interest in all of this data and stats to try to gain an edge. And also it is, with 22 people on a field, it is an intricate sport where there's always an educational bias there. With MMA or combat sports for that matter, there feels like there is more just a visceral reaction to seeing it. So can you kind of just tell me a little bit about the desire to have this level of knowledge and stat base behind it, when it's my understanding that most people are watching it and going to it because they like seeing a fight?
Yeah, and I'd say that was the NFL at one time. Before they started tracking stats, people were watching for the game. And then, once the data became available and those gamification opportunities were actually presented, that fantasy to bet in play in real time, that's when it really started to take off and people start to understand its value. And that's where we come in. It's like the NFL of the 80s. This doesn't exist in combat. So by us enabling real-time stats, we allow for that gamification, that fantasy to happen. One of our focus is actually enabling the markets for in-play betting.
Yeah.
So during the NFL game, you can bet during the game. In MMA, outside of the UFC in particular, MMA and boxing as well, you can't bet during the fight, outside of some major events. It's really not something that fans can take advantage of. We're talking about over 600 million fans globally, and there's a lot of leagues out there. So we enable that to exist. And from there, the culture is built. So we're really pushing them towards that new frontier of data tech that has taken over major North American sports.
Okay.
If I can just quickly add to that.
Yeah.
The NBA, for example, from 2011 to 2019, their viewership went up 20%. And they directly attributed that to the data and technology that they implemented. So MMA is just, another one in line to be able to adopt that and become really mainstream.
Okay, let's talk about gaming and gambling then, especially in fight, because short of the breaks between rounds, how do you foresee placing odds on whatever it may be, next takedown, whatever it may be? How do you kind of view that when the round is ongoing and anything can happen in literally an instant?
Yeah, so there's always momentum in fights. For example, a great example would have been the welterweight champion in the UFC, Kamaru Usman. He fought Leon Edwards, I believe, last year, and he was dominating all 5 rounds pretty much heading into the 5th. All 4 rounds heading into the 5th. And in that 5th round, he caught a mean leg kick to the head and got knocked out. these kind of things, like any better that would have placed that bet on Leon in play just for that one opportunity to take advantage of that puncher's chance, would have made a fair bit of change. So we really are telling the story of the fight through numbers for the bettors, and at the same time allowing them to take advantage of what's called a puncher's chance in fighting sports.
But how do you think through the speed at which something needs to be offered, latency issues of watching the fight, and getting this opportunity out there? Because, to your point, and to really just as a fan of combat sports, man, it's tough. Once the round is going, it's one punch, one kick away from changing literally everything in a moment's notice. For
sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But at the same time, I would say that, certain types of matchups, certain types of styles can really, people don't know what to expect until the fight starts. So, for example, if you're a really great striker and a really great grappler, which one is going to win? Which skill set is going to rise? And if you see it's the grappler early on, maybe that's something you put a quick bet down. As far as speed of what we do, everything we do is sub-second latency, real-time data extraction and analysis. So we allow the people to really take advantage of what's being, played out in front of them.
Okay. How'd you get into this? Tell me a little bit about your background.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I used to be a pro football scout up in Canada for the Toronto Argos. I would scout Northeast U.S. Left that in 2019. I didn't know if I'd go back to sports in general. And then the pandemic hit. All sports stopped, and I thought, damn, I really need to watch some competition. And so Dana White, the president of the UFC, found a way to keep putting on events. Skirt those COVID rules, and I'd tune in every week, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool, And I'd also play some bets myself because I'm a little bit of a sports gambler. And during that time, I really saw that there was a major lack of data and analysis of data that's available. So I would build my own spreadsheets, things like that. And eventually I said, let's see what we can do with machine learning and artificial intelligence. I went and found my technical co-founder who's got a PhD in this stuff. And we built some really cool initial prototypes. Eventually got funding and just kind of took off from there.
That's very cool. Had you looked into this type of stuff for implementation in football scouting or no?
So when I was in football, it was very much that old school mindset, like, trust your gut. Write what you see what you write. Grade what you write, pardon me. But now I'm starting to understand the power of AI and tech. And I've actually gone back to the teams that I work for, and we're working through some prototype stuff with them.
How do you feel about the mantra, trust your gut these days, now that you're working in math?
Yeah, I'm actually all about the data and the tech. Trusting your gut is the way of the past. I think that's no longer a smart play for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, though. The NFL draft just happened. Anthony Richardson, there's a wild array of opinions of him. The math will tell you something you're not going to like to see, and your gut's going to tell you something else entirely. So I guess we still do have test cases of high-level athletes that you got to trust your gut, for lack of a better term, sometimes.
Absolutely.
All right. So last thing on combat sports. And let's go back to the gambling element of this, because I think gambling, which I think is a big part of what you're trying to build and grow here. You mentioned the size of, obviously it's massive worldwide. Where is that conversion into bettors, and where do you kind of see that going into the future?
Yeah. So, it's really interesting. When we talk about those 600 million fans, a lot of them, again, don't have the ability to bet. When we talk about in-play betting, whether you look at the U.S., whether you look at Europe, Asia, over half of bettors, over 50% of bettors, bet in-play, bet live. And the fact that they can't do that, we are enabling this massive market of people that typically bet on sports to get in the in-play. If we look at boxing in the UK alone, 87.5% of fans that watch boxing in the UK are betting on the sport. So, conceivably, we're enabling the 50% of that number to be able to bet live during the fight.
Tim Malik is the CEO of Combat IQ. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bram.
On the next Future Sport podcast, follow the eyes. The answers are there.
So they started with the technology to look at how you could deploy eye tracking in a more scalable way. Again, with the intention initially to go and make this a new way to go control a computer, much like we have mice and keyboard today. The challenge in the technology that we see is, of course, making this work for everyone.
That's Anand Srivatsa, CEO of Toby, a company who builds eye tracking technology. That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein.